Good evening, the news gang is here, and tonight, goodies for the youth or pies in the sky, the season of promises and the 7.2 million questions for the ballot. Also on the show, countdown to the showdown. The racing horses, the jockeys, and a few jokers too, or are they? Plus, another verdict from The Hague, Somalia's applause and Kenya's protest, why everyone is at sea about the next steps. On the memo tonight, the silent killer inside the head, Kashuri punches into the world of no rules and lots of money. On the kicker, the Wanjala escape and the loss at sea. It is home and away. And on the angle tonight, the burning fuel crisis goes on. Who lit the fire?
Tukiwa taifa ambalo lapenda amani, sisi pia sio taifa ambaye itakubali kuingiliwa ama kutishwa ama tukubali hata inchi moja ya taifa letu la Kenya iingie kwa mikono ya watu wengine. Na sisi tuko tayari kulinda inchi yetu na amani ya inchi yetu vile tuko tayari kulinda amani za inchi zingine.
All right, so that's President Uhuru Kenyatta speaking a little bit earlier, perhaps in anticipation of that judgment that came from the International Court of Justice, giving huge swathes of the sea to Somalia. That was part of that dispute. Wilson Mushora is our sign language gangster tonight, and we will start, lady and gentlemen. Jamila Yvonne is away tonight, so... Yes, the only lady in the house. But let's start with you. This is, I remember moments after this decision, everybody was, I should say, at sea. Yes. Pun intended. What really had happened there? Because quite frankly, there were too many coordinates and latitudes and parallels and all of those things. But the bottom line is that this decision went in favor of Somalia.
It's true, Joe, because the judges of the ICJ ruled that a new border, they drew a new border, basically, with the ruling that they made a couple of days ago. And the new border is closer to the one claimed by Somalia, although Kenya kept a part of the 100,000 square kilometers bit that was under contention between the two countries. But yes, Somalia got something. Kenya lost a bit. Because remember, Kenya was claiming the whole 100,000 square kilometers of this area of the Indian Ocean, which is said to be rich in oil and gas deposits. And of course, also a lot of Kenyans depend on it because of fishing. But then Somalia has claimed this, and it's a dispute that I think has been going on for a while, until 2014, when Somalia went to the International Court of Justice to try and find direction. Between then and now, there have been postponements after postponements. Kenya wanted, I think, 3 different times, requested that the sittings of the court be postponed, giving various reasons. This dispute has caused tension between Kenya and Somalia. There have been bilateral talks, several of them, that bore no fruit. It even affected issues like direct flights between Kenya and Somalia, issuance of visas. And basically, it was a conflict that's been going on for a while. And Kenya even said a few days before the ruling that they're not going to accept the ruling of the court. And that's exactly what happened after the ruling was made. President Uhuru Kenyatta said they're rejecting it in totality. I remember the ICJ, the ruling is binding, but it cannot be enforced.
Actually, we have the president saying that in New York, where the president is basically saying they reject this ICJ decision.
Yep. Kenya wishes to indicate that it rejects in totality and does not recognize the findings in the decision. Kenya, like other independent countries, possesses a determined geographical territory. As a devoted member of the United Nations Security Council, as well as the African Union's Peace and Security Council, we call upon the rest of the family of nations to appreciate and respect our inherent right to protect by all available means our territory.
The Somalia president, this is the Kenyan president rejecting it, but the Somalia president welcomed it, saying it was a win for justice, it was a win of the rule of law, it was a win for the people of Somalia. He had a 15-minute live televised address after the ruling was made, and in it he accused Kenya of interfering with the whole process in terms of trying to derail it. In a way, President Farmajo spoke quite candidly about what he termed as Kenya's interference in its sovereignty, of Somalia's sovereignty in this dispute, because it's an agreement basically over which direction the border extends into the Indian Ocean. And as I said,
we can listen to him.
Yeah, we can listen to President Farmajo.
The federal government of Somalia hereby confirms that we accept the court's decision in line with international laws and norms. We hope that the Kenyan government will respect the supremacy of international law and will forgo their misguided and unlawful pursuits. We hope that Kenya will treat the court's decision as an opportunity to strengthen relations between the two countries and enhance cooperation between the two peoples.
And you know, the only way I think this ruling can be enforced is through international pressure. And remember, President Uhuru said they want the international community to speak on this matter and rule on it and decide on it. And finally, as I finish speaking, this is not the first time that a ruling of the ICJ is being ignored by a country. In 1986, the ICJ had ruled in favor of a case that Nicaragua brought to the court against the United States. The US ignored that ruling. In 2016, China ignored a ruling that had been made about the South China Sea claims. In 2018, the US again rejected the ICJ's ruling on Iran. So it's not the first time that a country is rejecting a ruling by the ICJ. Again, as I said, it's not legally binding.
The particular kind of countries that have rejected
the US and China.
But that's interesting. Linas, this is a very confusing moment, quite frankly, because on the one hand, at some point, Kenya appeared to be engaging with this court. At a certain point, they withdrew. Initially, they had challenged the jurisdiction of this court, but then kind of submitted themselves to that very jurisdiction. But somewhere down the road, they looked for all these postponements and all of that. But the bottom line really is that now President Kenyatta saying, well, they're not going to obey this. This is a UN court. And the timing couldn't be more interesting at a time when Kenya actually has just taken charge of the UN Security Council for the month of October.
Right. You call it confusing, but it can also be described as exciting for legal scholars, even here in Kenya, because this is our first most active interaction with the law of the sea in this way. We've had a dispute within our shores that is involving maritime boundaries. Maritime boundaries are something that have over the centuries been a disputed area. You know, we're talking of boundaries inside the water there, inside the deep sea, the ocean and all that. And remember in the 18th century, way back, legal scholars actually clashed on who should control the sea. And Hugo Grotius actually said, no, there should be the freedom of the sea. And territorial waters in the 18th century used to be called, you know, it should be within the cannon shot, like you can fire where your shot lands that's how far your land goes. But look at what technological advancement has also done to the sea. Man has conquered the sea, and then forcing now nations to think of delimitation, having territorial waters, having the economic zones, and also defining what they call the continental shelf. So here are the complexities we are dealing with as Kenyans. For legal scholars, this is a very, very interesting space. But you see maritime disputes have those two sides. There's the legal side and there is the political side. One thing that Kenya has been doing is to play hardball on the political side, because the legal argument may have been lost at the ICJ. I want us to listen to P.S. Kamau. This is way before the decision of the ICJ came through.
And in addition to withdrawing its participation from the current case, Kenya, on the 24th September 2021, also joined many other members of the United Nations in withdrawing its recognition of the court's compulsory jurisdiction. As a sovereign nation, Kenya shall no longer be subject to an international court or tribunal without its expressed consent.
Wale ambao wanafikiria ya kwamba hatuko tayari kulinda mipaka yetu, wajue hiyo ni ndoto. Twajua mipaka yetu. Sisi twaheshimu mipaka ya wengine. Hatudai inchi moja ya inchi ingine, hapana. Tumetosha. Mwenyezi Mungu ametupatia.
Look at that. The press conference, curiously, had the Vice Chief of General Staff, or what we call these days, Vice Chief of Defense Forces. Yes. He was right there standing next to the PS, Ambassador Kamau, during the press conference, because this is the language of territorial disputes. There is the diplomatic side, and of course, there is that threat to use force or to use whatever means.
Even just the fatigue, the jungle fatigue.
It's a statement.
Look at the president, and you think he's going to war the next day.
It's a statement that, look, we can defend our territory. But here is the problem for us as Kenyans. Kenya is a member of the UN, and the UN Charter actually binds these countries. In Article 94, members actually undertake to respect the decisions of the International Court of Justice, ICJ. Although they have been ignoring, the Charter in Article 94 actually says you are bound to respect the decisions of the ICJ. ICJ is the legal organ of the UN. They don't have another court. It deals with more of, you can call it the equivalent of civil cases. It doesn't deal with criminal cases. Human rights issues go to the ICC and other courts. But ICJ deals with disputes between nations, not individuals. And that's what we saw with Somalia going to court, taking Kenya to a member state to court, and that has been lost in court. One more complexity there. ICJ decisions are final. You can't appeal. There is no way of appealing. But also the process actually, even way before, and that's why you see the Kenyan Foreign Affairs Department and the presidency also falling back on, no, let's resolve this through negotiations. Because primarily the UN Charter encourages nations to resolve their disputes peacefully. And that is about negotiations, that's about bilateral talks and things like that are peaceful.
And actually, I think the judges went to great lengths to try and find out whether there was indeed an agreement between the two countries, even if it was verbal or if any one of the two parties had behaved in a way that would suggest that both of them recognized that existence of that agreement. And the court basically coming to the conclusion that there was nothing to indicate that there had been an agreement, suggesting that if indeed there had been an agreement, then that would take precedence over anything because the countries would then have sat down and agreed. Interesting. But Francis, this coming in spite of the many things that we do with Somalia, because that is again very intriguing, looking at the fact that we have KDF there. They rehearted, of course, into AMISOM, but all the same, Kenya, a very active member of the neighborhood, so to speak, trying to help in stabilizing Somalia. And in fact, even the Somali government, not so many people believe that they are a government on their own, that they can actually stand up for anything, let alone the territory of their country. Mm-hmm. So it's a very interesting and complex relationship that we have here, that on the one hand, Kenya is one of those countries that are playing a role in this whole security effort in Somalia, and on the other hand, there is this big fight going on around the maritime borders.
And it is also important, Joe, to look at a few instances before the judgment this week. You remember the president of Somalia, Farmajo, has been to Kenya several times. We've seen him hug with the president. We've seen delegations coming from Somalia. At the height of this tiff, And even flights to Somalia banned at one point. Even the ambassadors from the respective countries being recalled and so on and so forth. So it was a quarrel that was fomenting for quite some time. And I would even say that the judgment that was rendered this week was anticipated. Looking at the clips that we've played for President Uhuru Kenyatta when he attended that military drill at Boni Forest, that was in July. And you hear some of the things that you were saying about Kenya protecting its territorial integrity and in military fatigue. And General Robert Kibochi, Chief of Defense Forces, that day, in the presence of the president, even saying that the military was ready to defend Kenya's territory, just like their counterparts did in 1964 to 69 during that Shifta War. And those who remember what happened that time can clearly remember the kind of a situation that we were in. And not so long thereafter, that was in September, last month, President Uhuru Kenyatta handed the regimental colors and the national colors to a military base in Manda, Lamu County. These two events in July and in September happening not so far away from the contested area. And I thought that was basically sending a message that we are ready in the event that this is the route that we are to go to. Interestingly, when President Uhuru Kenyatta was addressing this judgment in New York, said he's now calling upon the international community to mediate, to arbitrate, to help resolve this issue, because Kenya and Somalia are neighbors. They have people who share a culture, a religion, a heritage, and so on and so forth. Basically understanding and acknowledging the intricate relationship between Kenya and Somalia. These are two countries. Kenya has helped Somalia to a great extent. In fact, some of the one of the major victims of instability in Somalia has been Kenya. And so it's a very dicey kind of a relationship where either way, the two countries would lose in the event of a tiff. And I want us to listen to two bites. One by President Farmajo. He spoke at length for about 15 minutes and actually even said that Kenya has been malicious in how it has been handling this matter.
We are
aware of the malicious steps violating Somalia's sovereignty that were undertaken by the Kenyan government in order to pressure the Somali leadership to sit at the negotiating table and facilitate looting of Somalia's maritime resources. Somalia did not choose to become Kenya's neighbor. It was Allah the Almighty's decision, and we have no choice but to coexist in a peaceful and neighborly manner.
Interesting. President Farmajo saying that Kenya and Somalia have just to coexist because they are neighbors, and it is not possible to, disentangle them as neighbors. And here a response from President Uhuru Kenyatta in relation to that judgment. Actually, he called it a zero-sum game.
Kenya and Somalia are neighboring states with a common border and communities with shared social, cultural, and religious practices. This decision is, in the circumstances, a zero-sum game, which will only strain the relations between our two countries. It will also reverse the social, political, and economic gains and potentially aggravate the peace and security situation in the fragile Horn of Africa region.
So either way, Kenya and Somalia have
those are very interesting things that the president said there.
Yeah, very interesting. So both countries have to find a way of resolving this matter, agreeing to disagree if need be. But I think it is also important to point at this point that other than Kenya and Somalia, are there other interested parties in this dispute? Why do I say so? Because of the oil, gas deposits. A lot of them in the contested area.
Believed to be there, yes.
And obviously, there would be other interested parties foreign nations that would want to do exploration in these areas.
Yeah.
So this is not just a Kenya-Somalia tiff. It also has other interested parties. And no wonder the heightened discussion.
That is true. And Jamila, that is actually one of the issues that President Farmajo is referring to there. It came up a little bit in the court as well, that there are concessions that Kenya has already signed with certain entities, doing exploration of oil and natural gas in the disputed area. And in a sense, Somalia was saying that these kinds of actions were meant to make it difficult to reach any agreement, because then Kenya will come and say, well, there's something we're already doing there, and all of that. And I think that also came up in the court. But be that as it may, it does appear, as Francis says, that this, without a doubt, is not just a dispute between Kenya and Somalia. There are far wider implications, far wider interests that go beyond the two countries. It intrigues me also that the president said that this thing would, among the many things he said, aggravate the security situation in the Horn of Africa region. That was quite heavy.
It was very, very, very heavy. And I was watching today a story that was done by Hassan Mugambi about the KDF day and how vested Kenyan soldiers, KDF soldiers, part of the AMISOM team, are in Somalia. The way they're helping communities. We were watching a story where they're helping them with water. A few days ago, we watched a story where female soldiers, Kenyan female soldiers, are part of the contingent that goes around there, trying to create that rapport with the women in that country, trying to help them, because it's easier, of course, culturally, even for us to relate with women as compared to men. Even things to do with medical care, things to do with even their businesses that they are doing with milk, and I think we need to take the feed.
We can go to the White House now. Yes. That meeting between President Uhuru Kenyatta and U.S. President Joe Biden.
Together on the Horn of Africa to advance peace and security. And we're also going to talk about strengthening the financial transparency and accelerating economic growth. You've spoken to that, Mr. President. I want to talk to you about that. And the fight against climate change. So our nations share a deep commitment to fairness and to respect and equity, and I'm committed to further elevating our ties with Kenya and nations across Africa as a whole. But Kenya is the key to this. So welcome, Mr. President, and I'm delighted to have you here.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and let me once again say it's a great pleasure to see you once again. I don't know whether many will recall, but President Biden in a former life visited Kenya, where we had an opportunity to meet when he was vice president, when he had come over again on issues related to strengthening the partnership and the relationship between our two countries. And it's really a great pleasure and honor to see you again. Let me also take this opportunity through you to thank your government and the people of the United States. During this very difficult time, the United States has done its best to step up in terms of not only helping Kenya, but the African continent in general with regard to access to vaccines. Happy to hear you on your announcement of that increase, because as many of you will know, as a continent, we are lagging well behind the rest of the world in terms of being able to vaccinate our people. So any additional support, like the President has just mentioned, is greatly welcomed, and we look forward to that continued partnership. We're also very closely partnering, especially in regard to the fight against terrorism globally. The United States has been a very strong partner to Kenya in that particular fight, and this is an area, again, I am hoping to have an opportunity to further discuss with the President. We are also keenly and very grateful with his strong position, especially with regard to climate change. This is an area where Kenya has made tremendous progress in her own right, and where we are firmly committed to the Paris agreement, and we're glad to see the United States has now rejoined. And we look forward to working very closely together on that particular agenda, which, as you know, our country, our continent is the least in terms of emitting, but pays the highest price. So we welcome your leadership in this area, and I look forward to having the opportunity to discuss that further with you. Keenly also wanting to engage, as we have been already, with the President on the issue of trade and investment between our two countries. This, I believe, is vital, not only in terms of further entrenching American interests on the continent, but also in helping us also achieve our social economic agenda. So that's another agenda that we are also going to be engaged in. So, Mr. President, let me just say it's wonderful to see you again. It's wonderful to be back here, and I look forward to fruitful deliberations as we move forward.
So do I. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Let's time, guys. Thank you. Let's go. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You guys, come on. Let's go. Come on, you guys. Thank you. Let's go. Thank you. How about the visit with the Pope, Mr. President? Kelly, come on. Thank you. You guys, let's go. Come on. Keep moving. Let's go. Come on. Let's go.
Looks like a lady.
All right. Yes, President Joe Biden there, President Uhuru Kenyatta, the two gentlemen basically outlining the agenda of the meeting that we would imagine is going to be happening behind closed doors starting now. And ladies and gentlemen, interesting, the two gentlemen laying the agenda, climate change, security. I think President Kenyatta talking a lot about COVID-19, the assistance from the U.S. He has been very big, Jamila, on this issue of vaccine appetite that he talked about even during that press conference that he had. And the U.S., one of the main countries, main sources, as it were, of the vaccines that we have been getting in this country lately.
Yeah, that's true. And I think over 60% of the U.S. population has been fully vaccinated. They have enough stocks of the vaccine, and it's good that we are getting some of it. The government's efforts in trying to receive vaccines from other countries that are willing to do that is bearing fruit, because we're getting more and more vaccines and more people are being vaccinated. That's one of the issues he's going to talk about. But I was reading an article today where one of the senators in the Foreign Relations Committee in the U.S. is the Idaho senator called Jim Risch, who was saying that other than those issues which had been mentioned by the press secretary of the White House, Jen Psaki, that they're going to discuss, there were other issues that he said he expected the two presidents would talk about. What are those issues? Fight against corruption, political violence, and the rising debt in the country. So these are issues which are very important in the country. They cited even what was happening, pockets of violence we've been seeing in parts of the country like Laikipia, along the borders. And then they also talked about how we have elections coming in 2022 and what the situation in the country will be like. Talking about the fight against corruption and what the fight that the advice that's being felt across the country in terms of all the different cases, corruption cases we've seen and heard. And then he said those are some of the issues that he feels need to be included in what will be discussions between the president and Joe Biden, other than all these other issues we're speaking about. Remember, this is coming at a time when you mentioned it that President Uhuru Kenyatta has assumed the chairmanship of the UN Security Council for this month. Issues to do with Ethiopia have been mentioned that he needs to talk about. Of course, you talked about, I think I had something about financial transparency that was said by President Joe Biden. The Pandora papers.
President Biden talked about it.
Yeah, it comes to mind,
And Lina's quite significant, I would say, that this is the first in-person, one-on-one meeting that Joe Biden is having with an African leader. Interesting that it would fall on the president of Kenya, looking at the manner in which the United States is heavily invested here in Kenya. We've seen them get involved in a lot of things that happen here, their security interests. Every time we have an election, they are heavily interested in what happens here. We saw their very heavy involvement, for example, in 0708 when we had lots of problems here. So Kenya, not just your run-of-the-mill partner of the U.S.
Not at all. Indeed, a very strategic partner and country, not just in recent times, but you can date it as far back as the Cold War, when Kenya was the only nation in the region that was considered democratic, considered to be pursuing the capitalist model of the economy, and also stable. Remember, in the 60s, 70s, we had a very unstable Somalia, unstable and communist Ethiopia. Uganda was unstable under Idi Amin, and Tanzania was considered socialist. So Kenya was the blue-eyed boy of the region, protecting Western interests, and the successive American governments have maintained very strong relations with Kenya, and it will not be a surprise that a continuation will be the reality under President Joe Biden. And obviously, look, in diplomatic meetings like this, the agenda is agreed on way in advance, and there'll be teams that work for months even on the agenda and the finer points of this. And you saw there how easily President Kenyatta basically gave a very clear summary of what the issues were. And you could tell in the way he arranged them, the priorities. The priority is on access to vaccines. And here we talk about climate change, something we don't talk about locally, but it is a global phenomenon. It's a big issue. There, again, President Kenyatta restating the commitment of Kenya to the Paris Agreement on carbon emissions. And there will be the unspoken issues as well. And in mind, I do have a lot of the Horn of Africa. It's a broad Horn of Africa question. Is this where the subject we were discussing before that press conference will come? The issue of the territorial dispute between Kenya and Somalia will come. Because Francis, Jamila, you rightly say, you know, this is not just about us. Mm-hmm. And there is a difference between our current dispute with Somalia and that of the Shifta era in the 60s. Shifta was a land boundary dispute, and primitive in nature, because what basically Somalia was saying is we should have all the Somalis in one place. Meaning right now we'll have in this panel one foreigner.
An expatriate.
Yeah, an expatriate seated in this panel. If the claim had succeeded.
Foreign correspondent.
You know, the response by the late president, first President Jomo Kenyatta, was actually hilarious. Apart from saying we'll defend every inch, he said, if you have a problem, you actually want to join each other, feel free to leave, but the boundary will not change. Mm-hmm. Yeah, meaning you can leave all the way from Kericho to Mogadishu. And that was President Kenyatta's way of saying territorial integrity will be protected to the hilt. Now, here is the difference between that, what I call a primitive ethnic nationalism-inspired conflict, with this one. This one, commerce is going to be a big player. Mm-hmm. And in it will be the potential, the possibility of other players. Remember, Kenyans did not pay attention to this boundary issue until February 2018, when Somalia was caught auctioning blocks of the sea in London to companies, prospective oil explorers, that they can come and explore oil in the region. And that's when, you know, this escalated, that this is becoming serious. So there lies the one issue. Oil will be a factor here. Mineral resources that are said to be in this area would be a factor here. It's said that, you know, it contains unspecified amounts of gas deposits, natural gas deposits. Now, and the sea has traditionally been a big cause of international conflict. We remember very well that right now there's a lot of tension, and there's always been, in the so-called South China Sea, because nations fight for access to trade routes. they want to control those trade routes. And increasingly, the nations that control the sea are those that actually invest heavily in navy and military capabilities. China is only coming up with this very strong claim to the South China Sea because in recent years it has significantly built up its military capacity, that it is capable to compete, they say, with the US naval forces that are in the Pacific. So this will be some of the factors that will be at play. We hear, through unofficial sources that Turkey could be a player on the side of Somalia. China could be a player as well. And who knows what we are telling the US in the closed door talks right now in Washington, D.C.
Maybe playing our team?
Yes.
Supporters.
Francis, there was something interesting that Joe Biden talked about, and you mentioned this after the break, because I think our break is long overdue, but something that could come close to Pandora Papers, because talked about domestic and international financial transparency. An interesting discussion that we'll have right after the break. But right now we have to take a break. News Gang will be right back in just a moment.